All right. Welcome back to the Partnership Mastermind podcast, where we unpack what actually works in B2B SaaS. I'm your host, Chris Lavoie. And just as a quick note, if you like what you hear today, do us a quick favor and hit that subscribe button and drop us a rating. Helps us keep bringing you the sharpest operators in the game. All right. Today's guest has quietly been shaping the future of partnerships inside one of the most complex companies on the planet. Andrey Lipattsev spent more than a decade of engineering ecosystems across Search, Chrome, and Google's privacy sandbox before stepping into product leadership at YouTube Ads. He co-hosts the Tech Alliance podcast. He's a Mastermind alum, and he's now launching his own Mastermind bootcamp on thriving in enterprise ecosystems. Andrey, excited to have you here.
Exciting to be here, Chris. It's super surreal to be hearing all those things about myself. I think hopefully folks will get something very down-to-earth and practical out of today's conversation.
Well, you can't spend any amount of time with you and not get those things. So I have zero worry about that. And let's start off with some fun, fast-hitting questions just to warm you up and give our audience a chance to get to know you a little bit better. You ready for that? Cool. Just the first thing that comes to your mind, just quick-hitting questions. The first one, what's one off-the-wall hobby or obsession your Google teammates would be surprised to know about you?
My Google teammates know quite a few things about me, so it'd be difficult to surprise them with anything at this point. But I'd say the one that I don't talk about so much is my obsession with Greek mythology.
Tell us about that.
This was supposed to be quick and off the cuff. No, I mean, look, I've been fascinated by Greek mythology from a very young age, and I've kept that fascination all through. I think if I hadn't jumped on this technology bandwagon, I probably would have been a classics researcher looking into ancient marble statues and works by ancient playwrights and so on. So still a big passion of mine. I draw a lot of inspiration from it. I've been rereading some of this stuff recently. And I tell you one thing, Netflix is missing out on a lot of really serious content right there. They don't even need to hire any playwrights. It's all out of copyright. So I'm just saying.
I agree. I totally agree. I'm not quite as into it as you are, but we did go to the Acropolis in Greece last year, which was pretty surreal. So Netflix, if anyone there is listening, it's time to start pumping out some content on that stuff. Cool. All right, next up. Look, you're a podcast host yourself with the Successful Tech Alliance podcast. Curious, what's the funniest or strangest thing that's ever happened while you were actually recording?
I'll tell you one thing, like most of the time people watch or listen to podcasts and they probably see this as a very polished experience, and so they miss out a lot of what's going on behind the covers, especially in the early episodes when you're starting out. And so I'd say one of the things that stands out to me the most, which speaks the real lesson there, it speaks to the resilience and inventiveness of people who come up with this stuff. And in this case, my co-host Marina, she had to jump through some really interesting hoops in the initial period of our recording, and she was really the powerhouse and the driving engine behind standing it all up. And so at one point, she was recording with me one of our early episodes in a co-working space, huddled under a blanket in order to create a better sound isolating environment for herself. And that image, and because we didn't record video, but I saw her all that time. And so that image just sticks in my head and just speaks volumes as to kind of how the length we go to for our listeners. So I hope you appreciate it, everybody.
I love that. I appreciate you saying that. As a father of a 5-month-old who can wake up at any moment's notice, I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
Sweet.
No, yeah, keep a blanket next to yourself at all times.
All right, cool. Next one. Look, you travel a ton. You've worked in Ireland, Switzerland, across Europe. What's one cultural insight that's shaped how you build partnerships, if there is one?
The moment you ask me that question, I immediately think back to Erin Meyer's culture map. And I think there's a significant proportion of our listeners right now who will be expecting another pitch for that book. But I might surprise you by telling you all that I'm not such a big fan. I actually found that in my time working cross-culturally, there's something to be said for stereotypes, and cultural stereotypes and just types in general. They emerge for a reason, and yes, you can observe certain similarities. But I found, working across cultures, there are a lot more similarities between people than there are differences between cultures. And therefore, if anything, my lesson has been, don't judge anybody by their cover or where they come from or where they operate. Try to get to know them as a person, and then figure out exactly what clicks for them and how you're going to partner with them.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's like open source versus closed source. Certainly when I love to travel, I want to learn as much as possible with these people because they're different. They have different cultural values. They operate differently. So I certainly co-sign with that mindset of just opening yourself up and learning as much as you can, which we'll get into in a bit in the more of our conversation. Cool. The second last one here on the quick hitting questions is, give me a non-business metaphor for your, increasingly famous ecosystem engineering framework. What's the image that maybe nails it?
I'm riffing off the very, I don't even actually know who that quote is by, the Live and Let Live. It might be a rock song. It might go way beyond that. We should probably look it up. But my approach to it, I'll give you an image and I'll also give you a phrase. So the way I think about it is thrive and let thrive. And I'm going to put it out there. Some of you who know me might have encountered this image before, but my favorite examples and the whole concept, actually, a big chunk of the concept of ecosystem engineering comes from nature. And if you Google ecosystem engineering right now, other than my LinkedIn posts, what you will find is a lot of Wikipedia articles about nature's ecosystem engineers, which are animals like beavers and elephants and some others. And you might think there's nothing in common between a beaver and an elephant other than the fact that they're mammals. But they selfishly create thriving spaces for themselves, in the beaver's cases, for example, and you should know coming from Canada, right? By creating sort of luxurious and ideal spaces for themselves, not at the expense of everybody else around them, and not specifically out of altruism and trying to help anybody, but what they build while building for themselves actually helps the entire ecosystem thrive. And I find that whole image super fascinating and aspirational.
I mean, I honestly learned a lot in how you describe that. And if I may try to interpret that, it's, you can't build an ecosystem for the whole world, so to speak, right? Like, even when Facebook launched, that wasn't the goal. You might end up doing something along those lines. So when I hear you say that, Andrey, it's like, hey, look, be intentional about how you build an ecosystem on the local sense, right? And if you do it with the right guiding principles, it should play naturally into the broader environments and other ecosystems that you're not even aware of, right? Is that kind of like build in the right way? And that will help you have your own successful, healthy ecosystem. But ideally, it won't interfere negatively in surrounding ecosystems. It actually might amplify and support them. Is that one way to interpret it?
This is spot on. And I'm not reinventing the bicycle entirely from scratch here. I'm absolutely building on top of principles that have inspired me for a long time. Sustainability and reusability of resources. So recycling, and I'm recycling in the broadest sense of the word, right? So building for the long term. And if you adhere to those principles, everything sort of falls together in the right way, at least in the long run. And this is my belief.
I like it. We're going to get a lot more into ecosystem engineering in a bit. The last question for you here on the quick hitting section is a bold prediction. How, in your mind, will AI reshape how big tech partnerships operate in the next few years?
Well, you heard it here first. I don't think it will. Right? That might not be the answer that you're expecting from somebody who's working on AI and using AI a lot in his daily life as well. But I would say, look, of course, I mean, again, I'm being a bit blasé, so you can actually cut this out and put this into a short, However, what I would say is that, of course it will. It will change it in as much as it changes all the other aspects of our life. But the fundamental principles of what makes partnerships and ecosystem work great, they're not going to go anywhere. The fact that companies don't partner with companies, but people partner with people, that's not going to go away because of AI. The fact that you need to understand and cater to your partner's needs before your own, that's not going to go away or change in any kind of way because of AI. We will be able to accelerate. We will be able to be more efficient. We will be able to do things, to go deeper maybe, do deeper research, maybe accelerate, right? But the fundamentals, I don't believe they're going to change, at least in the foreseeable future, until we hit the general intelligence, and then all bets are off, and then we'll see.
Yeah, I is maybe controversial to some, but certainly not in this forum. I tend to agree. I think the fundamentals, as you said, will stay largely the same. I think the efficiency boost will be there. I think you're going to see a huge shift in companies spending less resources on a lot of partners and having much better clarity on who are the best bets to place. And so I think they're going to go deeper with fewer partners because they'll have the visibility from the data perspective and they'll have the enabling technology to support their frontline teams to actually make those impacts. Sweet. Cool. Well, look, now we're getting into the fun stuff. And the way we've kind of architected this interview outline for you is really to kind of go start to finish in your career in a nice sequential fashion. And would love to start in the early days of you at Google, and you've been there for a decade and a half effectively. So let's start with, from search quality to global partnerships. You started in Google's search quality team back in the day, long before partnerships became your lane. So I'd love for you to walk the audience through that pivot, right? From community management, those early one-on-one tech collaborations, to ultimately realizing that real growth comes from ecosystem fit, not product market fit.
Yeah. Look, there's a very specific story there that stands out to me immediately when I think about this shift in my career, because I don't know to what extent I was super conscious of it at the time, but definitely over time I did become very conscious of how that shaped my the way I was looking at the industry and the ecosystem. Working with search quality, I was working a lot with communities and helping build them and spread the word. So that was one element of it. There was another one where we did some work trying to identify patterns of fraud and abuse in tangential to search, right? In areas that surfaced inside search, Google search, but that was just the entry point. The actual abuse was happening under the cover. And after some time working with the team, we realized that one of the most efficient ways to combat it is to target it at the source. And that meant working with other partners in the industry. And for the search team, at the time, at least for the search quality team, there wasn't a thing that we did. We tended to try to solve problems in search using the tools at our disposal, fundamentally making sure that bad results don't surface in them. And, if a link comes in to the pipeline, well, and if it leads to somewhere bad, you try your best not to show it to your users, and that's the end of the story. And you do it again and again. You improve your systems until as few inappropriate results surface as possible. And that is a fine approach. And it's not to say that needs to be removed or replaced. But I did see at some point, and again, as I say, I wasn't alone. We saw at some point that we could augment it by working with other companies. And that was eye-opening to me at the time. And we had some early successes, and also we hit some hurdles because it was super new and we didn't really know how to do it, and we didn't really know how to stand it up. But this fundamental realization that you can 10x, now probably for many of our listeners, take this into account. This was around 11, 12 years ago, if not longer. For many, this comes not as a revelation now, but as some sort of, blunt truth. And the super obvious statement. It was not for us, not for our team back in the day, and definitely not for me. And it opened my eyes into the fact that when you're trying to achieve something in terms of improving your product or your platform, the way we think of search at Google as a platform,
right?
You must focus on its own improvements, on its own strength. But there's another path as well, which is by working through the ecosystem of your potential and existing partners who might not even understand at the time or see the actual partnership and where it resides. And that's when all the good things that we're probably going to get to talk about today come in as well, when you're starting to see, well, what do they need? What do they care about? What do we need? How does that match up together? And how can we together build something or take action in a way that we couldn't independently? And that's the magic of partnerships. That was the magic for me. And once I saw that happening, I think my future career path was clear to me.
I love that. It's a really cool example. And I think anyone who's an historian of technology like myself finds it really cool that, hey, Google, once upon a time, as big as they were even then, right? This was still a relatively new concept, going outside of their walls to solve problems via technology partnerships. I think that's really cool. And obviously, I imagine at the time, your eyes open, but then you need to actually start working with these companies. Maybe they're the search, the browser companies, as an example. And in that, you're getting something in return, right? Which is better protection for your customers, minimizing fraud. So that's a value for Google. That's very clear for you to see. But I'm sure you had a moment where you're like, okay, I can't keep just asking for things from these companies or partners that are helping us. I need to be able to give back, right? And I know in our prep, you said that one of your first big lessons was focusing on what you can give, not just what you want. So how did that show up in those first few years? And how did that perhaps shape how you approach that early part of your career?
Would be very tempting for me to paint a picture right now that is a little rosier than the reality has been, to say, like, I've learned to do this in the beginning and
That's
then
not
I've
how we
always
do it
applied
here.
it.
Give us
not
the
how we're doing
raw.
it. That's
Give us the
no,
raw
I
truth.
know. Well, and the raw truth is that I kept learning and relearning the same very simple principle again and again in every ecosystem I worked with, and it was more or less successful. I'll tell you one thing that is a common thread throughout all of my career here is that where me and the rest of my team were able to get behind that principle of delivering value to clients and partners. Clients, I'd say even that's easier to understand. Like delivering value to clients before thinking about yourself is a principle that most people that I work with are already behind. But delivering value to partners in the ecosystem before thinking about yourself is not yet as widespread across all teams. I certainly did not realize it at first as well. So therefore, in all this work, and the work with our search quality partners, I mean, some of them, as you mentioned, there were browsers involved, there were also payment providers involved. And in my later work, just simply on search partnerships and on Chrome partnerships, we had to learn and relearn this question again and again and again every time. Because it's not just you who is learning this, right? It's also the teams around you who need to understand what it actually means for them, practically speaking. In that very first example, we very quickly realized that you must bring something to the table. Yes, the quality of your product is improving, but you need to, in order for your partner to make the investment that they need to make, it needs to be clear to them what is it that they're getting out of it. And then are you offering data in exchange? Are you offering marketing benefits in exchange? Like what does it look like, and how tangible is it, and how exactly valuable is it? And how can you maximize the value? How can you maximize the perceived value and the quantifiable value? All of that is a fairly complex equation. I think what has certainly happened, and what I would hope most of our users make very good use of, most of our listeners make very good use of, is that over the past decade in partnerships, a lot of content came out and a lot of materials, and this podcast included, and the entire Partnerships Mastermind content as well, helps you think in a structured way about exactly that very issue. How do you identify your partner's needs correctly and quantify the value that you deliver to them? If you start thinking about that from the very beginning, the rest of the process becomes much easier.
We appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's one of those things that it's like simple to say out loud or perhaps wrap your head around, like, hey, these strategic partnerships can't be viewed as purely transactional. They are heavily relationship based. And if you think of the relationships you have with your closest of friends, your significant other, your parents, of course, it couldn't last being a one-sided affair, so to speak, where you're constantly getting value and you're not giving it back. So it's one of those things where I think it's straightforward to understand. It's like, of course, I have to treat a partnership as a two-way street, but it's just a lot harder to do in practice, right? And we'll talk a bit later on about how you might approach that. You go ahead.
And if I can add to that, I mean, also there's, I know people are different, but I would say one of my, it's not exactly, well, let's not turn it into a psychoanalysis session. However, I will share that for me, it is sometimes a weak spot, a blind spot, to treat my own presence as a God-sent gift to others, saying, but I'm here, you're in my presence, you're talking to me, what else do you need in this life? Right? Is this not value enough for you? And this unfortunately, you know what I'm saying, I'm exaggerating only slightly. And this is certainly true for us personally, and we can forget about this even in our personal relationships. Certainly for companies, this kind of approach of, well, we're partnering with you, what else do you want? Like, is this not good enough for you? This approach can be it can be very detrimental, because on the one hand, you think you're delivering value, but you haven't really thought this through. You haven't really understood the value that your partners actually need.
I totally agree. I think there's a variety of ways you can interpret that. I think one of the more tangible ways is that activity does not equal value, right? And that's a whole different, you could go deep into the rabbit well on that one, but just kind of being present for partners, having these regular check-ins, showing up to their events, like that only gets you so far. So I think there's a huge difference between activity and being present, so to speak, but actually intentionally and directionally adding value. So I think I totally agree with you on that one, Andrey. Cool. Let's keep it going now. And let's start to get into the conversation of kind of operating and existing within, a truly complex organization, right? I think most of the companies and students that come through, say, the Partnership Mastermind program, and just the average partnership professional, they don't work at a company like Google, right? Google is obviously in a class of its own. So let's kind of unpack that story now. And so when you stepped into strategic partnership manager roles, working on Privacy Sandbox and those massive open web initiatives, what did you learn about leading through influence in a company of the size of Google? Because I've, candidly operated mostly in a early stage startup where I only had to convince typically my boss, who was like a VP level, and then I was off to the races. You've had to approach things totally differently. So help us understand what you learned about leading through influence.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because most of my life I've been fairly removed from anybody at VP level in my line of work, with some exceptions. And therefore, in fact, maybe I was blessed by the fact that I never had to convince too many VPs of anything. However, on the flip side, there's a lot more influence without authority laterally that you have to learn, right? And hopefully that is, you talk about Google being in a class of its own. First of all, it's not necessarily true. There's enough Google-sized companies in the world. They all operate slightly differently, but I suppose there's some of the fundamental principles apply. And also, you can hopefully extrapolate and apply these principles outside of this environment as well. This kind of, in fact, maybe this is what has also shaped my my way of working in partnerships too. I've treated my partners like a part of my team internally, and I treated my team as my partners, in the sense that some of the fundamental principles of my partnerships work has always been transparency and proactiveness and candidness and a desire to genuinely understand and help, like I would with my teammates. But at the same time, with my teammates, I would lean on not assuming credibility just because we're part of the same company, not assuming trustworthiness. On my part, I never approached, I hope I never approached, at least I tried not to approach my teammates thinking that they should give me the benefit of the doubt all the time, every time. Right? I thought of bringing value to them as much as I always thought about bringing value to my partners. And I think that helped. So whether you're thinking about working in a large organization, with your engineering teams, you need to build credibility with them in a way that matters to them, right? That helps them. People who are really passionate about creating, best-in-class products, help them do that and write the best code that is used in the best possible way. Same goes for product managers, which I am now, who care really about their product being successful. They're successful for whatever definition of success is, right? Bringing in revenue or driving usage or whatever it is. Like, how do you speak their language? And it goes across teams. We could be here all day delineating all the teams, the support teams, the marketing teams, the sales teams, you name it. You need to be able to, as a partnerships professional, you need to be able to speak their language, understand. We're almost repeating ourselves, but that's not surprising. You need to understand what it is they need, what kind of value do you bring to them through the partnership organization that you represent, through the partners that you bring in. And the value will be slightly different for everybody. The value that you bring for the product team is different than the value that you bring to the sales team. You need to understand what it looks like. You need to unpack it, and you need to package and present it in the right way. So that would be my major lesson.
Super good insights there, Andrey. And let's unpack that a bit, because you said some things that are obviously relevant, but I want to dive a bit deeper. So talking about things like getting to understand your counterparts, what are they motivated by? What do they care most about? So for the product managers, a highly used product that has strong NPS, as an example, I think is clear. But can you give us like an actual tactical play? Not one that maybe you can do in a day, but maybe it takes a couple weeks, or maybe it just takes even longer. Like if I was to ask you, hey, point blank, what is the most successful thing you've done in your career over the last number of years when it comes to building those strong relationships with those really important counterparts to build your credibility and get more yeses than nos? Is there one thing in particular that comes to mind that you're like, you know what, this is the thing I always go back to and it hasn't really failed me yet?
Yeah, look, I'll share an example that is quite specific. Hopefully that you can still generalize. Because of course, as we discussed, is the actual what you do is going to be different depending on the team, but I think the spirit remains. One of the most successful examples that springs to my mind immediately is when I was able to connect our lead engineers working on the Privacy Sandbox with one of our most critical platform partners, So another large enterprise company that was actually implementing the APIs created inside the privacy sandbox in a very direct way. And this sounds very specific, and yet you do need to make it happen. We got them into a room together to workshop for a day and go through very specific issues and work through very specific challenges. And at the end of that exercise, they've built trust, they've built a connection that remained, they managed to achieve some very specific results right there and then, and also build out an infrastructure that lasted for years in terms of how we operated afterwards. And by facilitating that, but by making that happen, I gained, hopefully, trust both with the partner who saw that as a tremendous value in terms of us investing into helping them build a solution. And our own engineering team saw it in exactly the same way, because they also, that's exactly the kind of engagement that they were craving from people who use their product. So this is a very specific example. If you shorten my entire story, it's literally one sentence. Well, I brought the engineering team and the partner together in a room and we had a workshop. It's as simple as that, but it's a thing that you need to do because of what? Because you need to go back and see what do your partners and your internal partners need the most, and you try to give it to them.
That's a great story. One thing I want to unpack for the audience is it sounds simple, right? And having done exactly what you've described many times myself, it sounds simple and maybe even slightly intuitive. But what I would love to ask as a final question there, Andrey, that's the tip of the iceberg. That's what you see. You see Andrey doing that thing. But what I am fascinated by is the behind the scenes work. Before you even were able to get these two people to meet, there's a little bit of lobbying that has to go on. You have to prime your internal reps because they get inundated by other product managers and partner managers all the time, I'm sure, of like, hey, pay attention to me, meet with my partner, prioritize my partner on the roadmap, right? So you actually have to have the credibility built in to even go to them. But when you do go to them, you have to be persuasive and value added in the sense of like, hey, here's what's in it for you if you take this meeting out of your precious time, and you also get to get the partner rallied around it. So the final question is, help us understand the beneath the iceberg effect, right? You've already built the credibility, but how do you actually even get meetings like that to happen? Because I think that's where the real value is for our audience is, okay, I know I need to bring my product leadership on a call with my top product partner. That makes sense to me. And he said earlier that I need to build credibility early to give myself a chance, but help us close the gap. What's that final tactical piece of how do you actually get a yes to get those meetings booked?
I mean, again, we can't talk about the final one without probably going a couple of steps backwards. We're not going to go too far into the whole history, but let's say what I start by thinking about is what we already mentioned several times. It bears repeating. Think of the value, right? So you think deeply through initial engagements. Sometimes you don't even, like, if you don't know those product people, those engineering teams directly, personally, and you don't have the chance to ask them, look at what they write about, look at what's in the product requirement documents, other documentation available about the product. What is important for them? What are the risks, maybe, that they're focusing on? Sometimes that's mentioned. I mean, good product documentation normally mentions the kind of risks and mitigations that are there, right? So those things really stand out. What are the KPIs? What are the key metrics? Understand how that connects to the partner network that you have or you're developing. Or in fact, start developing your partner network, if you're at that stage, based on these inputs. Then start approaching. Again, if it's an option, if it's not an option, make it an option. Start approaching those engineering and product teams in some way with questions, right? What if we did this? What would be the most valuable for you from interaction of this nature? If I was to connect you to this partner, or in fact, if I was to connect you to any partner, what would be the most helpful thing for you? So ask lots of questions, I guess this is what I'm saying. So first, do your research, then ask a lot of questions that are ideally informed questions, because again, so it's one thing to be asking a lot of questions, and if you don't want to feel, I mean, sometimes people are reluctant. I myself, let's not even talk about people. I might be reluctant to ask questions because of fear of appearing incompetent and lacking knowledge, which is totally true. I mean, ideally, people don't react that way to people asking questions, but some might, and you might feel like it's a possibility. To minimize that risk, at least to minimize that risk in your own head, do your prep work initially, so your questions are grounded in specific data that you definitely have, right? And then, so once you've done your research, asked the right questions, then you pitch. then you pitch your internal teams just in the same way as you would pitch your partner. You say, we're going to do a thing. The outcome of this thing is going to be X, and that is directly related to your major success metric Y, and also is a mitigation of your critical risk Z. This is how it all comes together, and it's measurable. And once this interaction is over, we'll be able to see if it has worked that way or it hasn't.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm glad we went down that path, because that's exactly what it really looks like to get these yeses. And two things I love there before we moved on is A, study your main counterparts. You can't get to know everybody in your organization at this level, but certain people matter more to you, right? And you're going to need them. So really get to know them and be a chameleon, right? Literally talk differently when you talk to them. You really have to. And then the same thing is hit them with this really tailored approach where you're showing the how you're going to de-risk the situation. And to Andrey's final point, just try it. And if you're consistently getting no's or they're not even responding, it's really tempting to have a pity party for yourself and be like, oh, my company just doesn't care about partnerships. I'm here to say that that's BS in many cases. You just haven't developed the skills required to be more compelling and persuasive, right? Like that's the reality, right? Maybe that's contrarian, but if you're not getting people taking you seriously, either they're not saying yes or they're just ignoring you altogether, you clearly aren't resonating in a way that's clear and compelling, right? So I think Andrey is honest here of like, hey, look, this takes time, right? But eventually you will get to a point where you develop those skills that you can use repeatedly. Is that a kind of a fair way to wrap up this one, Andrey?
It certainly is, but I would also take a little bit of the pressure off of some of our listeners and say, hey, I agree with Chris, but I also say that, don't beat yourself up too hard about it. It might be the case that your company isn't ready for partnerships, in which case you should be looking for another place to be applying your skills. That is also totally a possibility.
This is why I love interviewing fellow podcast hosts, because they can keep me in check when I get too worked up. But it is fair. Yeah, some companies are like that. But I do candidly see too much excuse making. And I've been that person many times myself, where you just lazily kind of ascribe blame to the company when it's like, well, are you really strong at persuasion and negotiation? Maybe not. So you need to develop those skills.
No, and plus in any case, I'm saying, here I couldn't agree more with you. And I think I think it's worth belaboring this point. Stop with the blaming of other people. Yep. What is in your control? Either improve your pitch, or if you've improved your pitch and nothing has changed, get the hell out. Those two things are in your control.
I think we've caught one of our headlines for this episode from that one. That was great. Cool. All right, let's get into a topic I know you're really excited about, and as a spoiler, is really going to be the thesis of your Mastermind Bootcamp, which I'm so thrilled for you to be launching this fall in 2025. So ecosystem engineering practice, right? Let's dig into this framework that you're becoming known for. Can you first give us the high level definition, and then as a second part, get practical of how you actually apply this in practice?
Right. So high level definition, let's start with that. Yep. I'd say, and this is exciting and also nerve-wracking for me to be talking about it for the first time here in a public space like this, but the way I think of ecosystems engineering, it's a business growth mindset grounded in sustainable self-interest.
That's a great definition. And now we have an analogy from earlier with the beavers and the elephants. So we can put a picture on it. So that's great. So how do you then actually apply sustainable self-interest and circular economy thinking when you're building alliances specifically? Let's take the next step.
Well, so there are a few basic principles. Again, ideally, most of them will sound familiar to all of us, right? Number one is the sustainable self-interest. I believe firmly that you can challenge us on this in the comments, and please do. Even altruism has some element of self-interest baked into it. So understand what it is. Sustainable self-interest doesn't necessarily always and only means monetary revenue, but it needs to exist, and you need to be able to explain to yourself what your interest is. Because again, partnerships are not exclusively a revenue-driving proposition. You could be, first of all, in my specialty in technical partnerships, there's not always a direct revenue-driving play. You can also be in a non-profit organization where revenue doesn't come into consideration at all. It's not about revenue. It's about the impact that you have, and you still need to be driving partnerships. In fact, in some ways, even more so than in a revenue-generating situation. So we're back to principle number one. What is this self-interest that will sustain you in the long run, right? That you're driving through partnerships. The second principle is sustainability. And sustainability, not only in the sense of resource usage, is just thinking the way I think about it, I believe, is hopefully fairly simple. If I kept doing this thing that I'm doing right now for the next 5 years, would there be still a space for me to be doing this? You know what I'm talking about. If I'm literally destroying, coming back to our nature metaphors here, if I'm destroying every single tree in the vicinity to I don't know, burn them for firewood, would I still be able to keep doing this in 5 years? I think we've all seen as humanity that that's not how it works, right? Therefore, doesn't mean you can't cut them down, but you need to replant them. So think it through. So how can you do what you're doing, deriving your self-interest, while ensuring that you can still do this a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? With your partners. Principle number 3 is diversity. In some circles and in some geographies right now, a controversial topic. I tell you one thing, it took me myself a while to really get behind the notion of diversity being almost a value in and of itself. And then what nailed it for me was, again, this the nature comparison. Mono-species ecosystems not only don't succeed, they don't exist. It is impossible for a species to exist by itself. It just dies out. Because even if because obviously, for obvious reasons, the only way for it to exist is to cannibalize then, if there's nothing else to interact with, and then it cannibalizes itself and then it disappears. Or it speciates and then the diversity reemerges again. So I think that example hopefully is very clear in nature. And yet somehow we sometimes maybe tend to think, well, no, that's nature. That's like birds and the bees in the forest. That's not how people work. No, that's exactly how people work. And that's exactly how businesses work. So you can either then, you can ignore it at your own peril, or you can be very conscious about it. How do you cultivate diversity? How do you see diversity as in everything, by the way? And primarily for us, for example, in your partner ecosystem, in terms of size, in terms of types, in terms of approaches to partnerships, the depth of partnerships, right? Not all your partners need to be strategic, but also not all your partners can be tactical. You need to have a mix. And so we could go down that rabbit hole for hours, but fundamentally, think diversity of your approaches and your network. That's principle number 3. Do you want to interject?
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm just soaking this all up. So my next question is, one of the things I hear from you is sustainable principles, really having a forward futuristic mindset of, hey, decisions I make now and the roots I lay now are going to matter 5 to 10 to 15, 20 years from now. So there's a sense of intentionality that I pick up on when I listen to you, Andrey, that I think is refreshing for a lot of folks who are just so focused on the now. I've got to hit quota this quarter, so to speak, right? So my last question for you on this topic is, for someone who's listening to this right now, running a partner program, which is many of our users and audience, what's one move they can focus on in the next few months even to lower barriers to collaboration in pursuit of building resilience into the ecosystem? And I love that word resilience, because that's the word that comes to mind for me when I listen to you talk about ecosystem engineering.
When I think about lowering barriers, I think we've covered some of it already, right? Let's just recap and see how we can connect some of the actions that we've already talked about in terms of barriers. Number 1 that springs to mind very clearly, it's diversity again. When you focus intentionally on generating diversity, one of the first, hopefully obvious solutions that will come to mind, or at least ideas that will come to mind, is, well, why isn't my ecosystem diverse already? What do I need to do to make it diverse? There you go. That will lead you towards understanding what barriers to entry exist and what actions you can take to make them. And this can be as simple as, it can actually be, simple, I say, it can be anything. It could be as mundane, but don't forget about it, as making your resources accessible, like literally accessible for people with different abilities, right? To tailoring your offering and your partnership structure from, as we discussed before, from the largest partners to the smallest, from the strategic to the transactional. If when people first approach your existing partnership or emerging partnership ecosystem and they feel like they're, I don't know, let's take an example. They feel like this is not for them because it feels like too large an investment or a hurdle they cannot get over. Figure out an offering that would work for them. So that's one example. Therefore, so lower the barrier by focusing on diversity. And if we were going to say maybe another example is taking us back all the way to the beginning of the conversation, which is quite fitting towards the end of it. Let's refocus again on your value for yourself and the value you bring into the partners. One of the biggest barriers your partners might experience in working with you is that any partnership requires an investment. So they might feel like they don't have the resources necessary to be able to invest in this partnership, even if they feel like, if on some level they feel like they would be willing to. There is this something there which makes them feel like it's too much for them and they can't afford it. For some reason, not even monetarily afford it, but in some way they can't afford it. And that's a barrier. And that's a very specific, very clear barrier that if you're able to identify while thinking through their needs and their values, you'll be able to say, is that what you need? I don't know, you feel like you don't have 10 hours a week to invest in this. Would you be able to invest 2 hours a week? We would be able to do something different than we would with 10 hours, but it's also something for us in 2 hours. And all of a sudden the barrier has lowered and the floodgates are open and more people are coming in. And then before you know it, everybody's saying, 2 hours, 10 hours, I want to invest 200 hours.
I like that. I think that's great. I think that's a great wrap up to that section. I think that gives a pretty clear blueprint for anyone listening of like, hey, like if this is something I do buy into, which I suspect people will, where do I even get started? And I think really focusing on your own self-value, so to speak, and the barriers that might be in front of you, how can you systematically lower them whilst kind of still remaining true to your values? I think that's a sound approach. Now let's finish off with the last section here, which is talking about your journey from being a student to an instructor of the Partnership Mastermind program, which I'm personally absolutely thrilled about. So, you're not just a guest, you really are now part of the family. And you came through the Partnership Mastermind yourself first as a student and now stepping up to be an instructor. My first question, though, for you, Andrey, is ultimately what drew you into the program in the first place as a student? And perhaps what was the single biggest mindset shift that you were able to take back to your full-time role?
The first question is much easier to answer than the second one. We shall see. Maybe the second answer will emerge as we can keep talking. But the first one was simple. I was looking for my ecosystem, right?
Right.
I was looking for a space of people like-minded with similar or compatible goals and values and approaches. And I couldn't have looked in a better place. And again, first of all, I need to thank you, Chris, for standing it up. However, once you do create something like this together, it draws people of a certain nature. And therefore, like if people listening to us are in a similar position, just starting out in this business or having worked in partnerships for some time and feeling maybe somewhat isolated, feeling a little bit misunderstood or lacking sounding boards, lacking people of a similar mindset with whom they could exchange. It's programs like this, if they existed, that would be a solution. And for now, there's not a plural of programs. This is the program that exists where you can come in and interact with people similarly minded with very clearly aligned goals. It's so super refreshing, very rewarding. As a student, that's exactly what I hoped to get out of it, and that's what I did get out of it. Now, value that I drew out of it. There was some tactical things that I certainly learned from you, right? And they were, like most things, simple and surprising that you like, how come I didn't think of this myself? This is how learning works, right? You build on the knowledge that you had before, but you need to compound it using input from other people. Simple concepts like ideal partner profile was a very specific, and it's a framework that you yourself have worked on and built on and improved tremendously over the past couple of years as well. So I would say people coming into this will learn either this or something else. They will learn very specific, very clear concepts that have developed over time and will be very directly applicable to their day-to-day work. And then at a high level, and again, it's not surprising, it's a value proposition. You have it in the Partnership Mastermind description, and not unsurprisingly so, it's the network of people. It's literally the ecosystem of people that you create through whom you keep making connections and generating additional ideas. It could be all the way from straight up business deals that emerge from the fact that you've gotten to know somebody who is in the same industry and needs to be your partner, to something a little bit more roundabout, right? Where, I don't know, like 2 years down the line, I find myself surrounded by a dozen other like-minded people who also feel the need to be teaching this thing. So it could be like this.
Well, I mean, look, I can say that you're a dream student for myself. Challenge the status quo. I vividly remember you showing up in those cohorts, and little did I know then that you'd come on to join us. And so now let's talk about that. You're gearing up to teach your own boot camp on thriving in complex ecosystems. My question for you there, Andrey, is what's the promise of that course, right? And who's the dream student you can't wait to coach?
That's the toughest question to answer, and I should have a very crisp and clear answer, which I hope I kind of do. The dream student is somebody open to change and growth. That is the most fundamental requirement, if I may say so. That is the basis of the ideal student profile.
Like coachable, it's willing to
somebody.
Yeah,
the growth mindset and the desire to structure your work and take the 10,000 feet overview of what you're doing is critical for me to be able to interact with successfully. Then diving somewhat of a level deeper, I'm thinking primarily about people either working inside large enterprises like I am, or also interestingly maybe working with large enterprises, like a lot of the people that I've been interacting with. And this is first-hand experience that I've gained over a decade of working in partnerships at Google, that is both challenging to understand how you stand up technology and product partnerships from inside a big organization, just as challenging as understanding, well, how do you stand up a partnership, a product or technical partnership with an organization of that size and complexity from the outside. There are no sure-proof recipes, like do these 3 things and you will necessarily get results.
Yep.
There are principles and ideas and approaches, playbooks that you can try and improve on, that I hope people will be able to take away and apply immediately and also build on immediately as well.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. I know how much demand this course is going to bring, and I think you're the perfect person to lead it. The last question I'll leave you with for our audience is anyone who's listening who's considered maybe joining the mastermind community or enrolling in some of our programs, and they ultimately make the decision to join, what's your best advice to make the most of it and make it a transformative experience as opposed to just kind of signing up, but not really leaning in and getting the full value of it, right? How would you kind of coach students coming into your programs or any of the programs to really lean in and make the most of it during whatever the 4-8 week time period it might be?
Yeah. I'd say it's not always that easy, but try, at least see if it works for you. Try to, before you join, before you sign up, try to define the specific challenge that you have in mind that you're trying to solve. What is the ideal outcome for yourself? If you have that, be vocal about it, be clear and transparent about it with me in this case, or with anybody else you're interacting with as your Partnership Mastermind coach or instructor, so that they can tailor the offering to you, and then consistently and continuously come back to it through the course, right? And be very focused on what it is that you're trying to get out of it, and how do the things that you're learning apply to your challenge. I would say, that's on top of everything else, being open-minded and appreciating sort of new knowledge that kind of goes without saying. But this focus on very specific challenge that you're trying to solve is super helpful, because it helps you pay attention, it helps you stay motivated, it helps you see the connections between what you're learning and how you're going to apply it.
Yeah, I love that. I couldn't agree more, having led dozens of these programs myself, is being outcome driven, right? Like having a clear goal in mind. And that's why in the intake forum in week 1, I'm challenging students, which you'll do as well with your own students, of like, hey, look, there's a lot of skill areas that are relevant to being a great partner professional, but there's only one most important skill for you at this very moment, right? That if you were to make 20% improvement on, would have an outsized impact, right? Like, what is that skill for you? And then how can you attack that intentionally and directionally throughout this program, right? I don't ask students, and I don't expect students to build a bunch of skill development across all the skill areas. That's not realistic and probably not that relevant or helpful. It's like, hey, what's that one skill area that's holding you back from hitting a huge growth spurt or a new productivity milestone or a promotion like work in the community and the program to achieve that. I think that's a great approach. But cool. Look, Andrey, this has been awesome. I'm seriously so thrilled to have you join the Instructors Guild, so to speak, to lead your own programs. I know this is going to be extremely popular and powerful. I recommend anyone follow Andrey on LinkedIn. He's got great content. He's got the Tech Alliance podcast, and now he's got his Mastermind Bootcamp. So it's plenty of things to get from Andrey. And finally, to anyone listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe and drop us a rating. Helps us bring on more top operators like Andrey who want to share their playbook. But that's a wrap. I'll see you next week on the Partnership Mastermind podcast. Thanks again, Andrey.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody.